The Houston Texans will be without star receiver Stefon Diggs after losing him to a torn ACL for the season. Can the Texans survive another next man up situation? And if so, is that player already on the roster? All of that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Texans fans across the nation, welcome to the show. I'm credential media member and Texans football analyst John Some Sports Guy Hickman, alongside Texans credential media member and the man with the big hat and normally with the even bigger smile if you're watching, but if you're listening, I am with Brian Big Sarge Bearfield. Thank you for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer on the show, which is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today we're talking about losing Stefon Diggs for the year. How can the Houston Texans survive moving forward after losing such an impactful player on and off the field for this franchise? And should the Houston Texans look to bring in a receiver at the deadline? Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Big Sarge, rough day for the Houston Texans as they lose wide receiver Stefon Diggs due to a torn ACL. Coach Nico Collins announced Tuesday. Texans are losing 47 catches, nearly 500 yards in the air, 3 TDs, but more importantly, they are losing a leader in that locker room and on the field. This is a very tough blow for the Houston Texans, Sarge.
For those of you all who are on this audio journey with us on the Locked On Texans podcast, you can't see me, but I'm currently in all black, and I think that I'm representing the Houston Texans fan base. I think that I'm representing the Houston Texans. It is a sad day for the organization, losing one of their leaders in the locker room. And I know that you were waiting to hear some joyous, boastful type Big Sarge, but right now, John, I just don't feel it, man. I just can't feel it because Stefon Diggs was someone that I had developed a relationship with in the locker room, man. And to see him not be around is a sad day for the Houston Texans organization. And when you look at it, John, he's one of those guys. His locker is in between CJ Stroud, Joe Mixon, and Tank Dell. That right there is pretty much your Houston Texans offense. And for those guys to be sitting there amongst each other, just talking football, but more importantly, talking about life, Stefon Diggs' leadership in the locker room is going to be sorely missed. He's one of those guys that not only helped out the wide receivers, but also helped out the defensive backs. I think that I've told this story before. I've shared this story, but I'll share it again. During training camp, we got a chance to talk to Jalen Petrie. He was the last one to speak, and Stefon Diggs waited until he was finished with his press conference so they could go over routes. Those two were two people that were going back and forth with each other the entire time during training camp. And then as soon as practice was over, they get with each other on the sideline, and then they will go over, okay, well, this is the route that I beat you on. This is how you could prevent me from doing it. And then Jalen Petrie would say, well, as a defensive back, this is what I'm looking for, so you might want to do this. John, he got a very, very bad rap coming into Houston for his time in Minnesota, for his time in Buffalo. And he's one of those guys where you're going to miss not only his production on the field. And I understand that he didn't have the best. I mean, 47 catches, 496 yards, 3 touchdowns. That's kind of low for Stefon Diggs' standard, but just him being on the field allowed other things to happen, John. So right now, I'm kind of, sad for the Texans fans who won't get a chance to see Stefon Diggs, participate in any more games for the rest of the season. The organization loses a leader. He's going to be back in that locker room after he, heals up a little bit. But, just him being on the field, just having his voice. But John, let me tell you this. Happy days are here again. The Houston Texans got some young wide receivers, John, that is going to step on the field and finally prove what they can do. I know.
I can't wait to talk to you about that. I cannot wait to talk to you about that because I think that's the perfect way for us to look at how can the Texans survive moving forward. Just a little bit about Stefon Diggs. When he first got to Houston, he had 3 years left on that deal. The Houston Texans voided that deal. So I do think that this is a situation for the Texans to do a couple of things. Number one, see who they got. We'll talk about that. But also, he was up in age, and that allows for them the flexibility into going into next offseason with Stefon Diggs. Hey, we want you to come back, but the way that things ended, can we get you back at a cheaper price? And I think that's the fair reality of the situation. But to your point, I think more importantly, you talk about him and that relationship he built with with Jalen Petrie and the other defensive backs on his team. Kamari Lassiter, we saw them go at it at practice. What he was able to do, and not only for the DBs, but for that wide receiver room and for this offense and for this team, go back to that Green Bay Packers game. Who was out there by himself going up against 53-plus men of a team? That was
like the most city done, 0, 1 deep.
1 deep, and he brought that attitude to Houston that I think a lot of us behind the scenes have been wanting to see. Just like the talent is there, but they need a couple of dogs, and they need a couple of guys that are ready to fight, and that's Stefon Diggs. And so, yeah, listen, he came into this situation clear-cut number 2 receiver. Like we all ended off last year saying to ourselves, Nico Collins is this team's number 1. And for some people that need a reassurance, well, we saw it at practice.
Yeah.
But for Stefon Diggs to come into this situation here in Houston and to be a clear-cut number 2 and have almost 500 yards through 8 weeks and give Houston something in the air and on the ground, but ultimately, and I think his biggest role was to be that big dog of a brother to say, y'all got it in you. One thing I love to see was just him and John Mechie mixing it up as much as they did. And whenever John Mechie got a pass, remember the preseason game, who was out there on the field?
Yeah.
Almost on the 40
Diggs.
It was Stefon Diggs. So for the Houston Texans, if we look strictly at his impact, they are losing somebody that meant a lot to the locker room. CJ Stroud was asked about just emotionally processing Diggs being injured. He said it sucks. It's not easy. It's not something that I can just have a whole bunch of words for. I just hope and I try to wrap my mind around what happened, but it's tough. You can't really think too positive about it. You try to think positive about it, but it's not a bunch of positive thoughts, and I really feel bad for him. So that's coming from the leader of the team.
Yeah.
And you mentioned those guys sit by each other. They talk and chop it up all the time. They were going over how they can get better all the time. And so they're losing that guy. Yeah, he'll be around the locker room. Yeah, he'll be around the franchise once he heals up and goes through the surgery process. But it means a lot to have him suited up on Sundays, on Thursdays, on Monday nights whenever they get a chance. So I do think the Houston Texans are losing somebody that meant a lot to this culture that they have been working hard to refine since bringing in D'Amico Ryans. I think he was an extension of the attitude side of D'Amico Ryans, and so that hurts for the Houston Texans. But now on the other side, we got to talk about how they can survive moving forward without Stefon Diggs yet.
I was going to say just real quick, I also feel bad for Stefon Diggs because he bet on himself. And he came here with a 1-year contract, and he still had years left on his contract, and he got those voided because he wanted to become a free agent after this year. This was like a prove it deal for him. And now with what he's going through, I don't know how many teams coming off of what he's about to go through. I don't know how many teams will give him a long-term deal now with his age and that injury.
And hopefully, if things can work out between it, because I would like to see Stefon back here in Houston.
Yes, me too.
And I think Houston needs to, ultimately upgrade a little bit. But Stefon can really be what Robert Woods is for this team right now.
Yes.
He's always been,
Robert Woods.
To Robert Woods, but he's always been a much better talent. So you can bring him back on a cheaper deal and allow yourself as a team the flexibility to upgrade. You're looking at, once again, a very dangerous wide receiver room. You got guys that can do a bunch of different things. Now, for the Texans, they play on Thursday, short week, so they will see who they have on this roster moving forward to complete the year. Nico Collins does come back in about a week or so, but it would be tough to see how they can move forward and survive without Stefon Diggs because they haven't really given them those guys, those young guys specifically, the time to really operate. So we'll talk about that and more on the other side of the Locked On Texans podcast. But Texans fans, listen, you know what I want to tell you guys about and hook you up with? Renter problems. We all have had renter problems, but listen up, renters. If you ever feel like you're stuck in a loop of rent payments, just watching your money vanish into air, well, right now it's time to turn that rent game around and start earning some serious rewards. That's where Built Rewards come in. Real talk. We've all been there. You feel like you're burning cash. You need to check out Built Rewards right now. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent. Every month, pay your rent and watch Built points roll in. Use points to jet off on a dream vacation. Who wouldn't want to do that? Put your points towards a flight or a hotel stay with 500 more airlines and 700,000 or more hotels and properties. Earn points by paying rent right now when you go and join built.com/locked on. That's joinbilt.com/locked on NFL. Make sure you use our URL so that they know we sent you. It's simple. You want to take a trip. You pay your rent on time. Do yourself a favor and join built.com/locked on NFL to start earning points with your rent payments today. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. If you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast. And Sarge, as we continue to move forward, here's some numbers for you.
All right.
Receiving routes ran this year. Xavier Hutchinson, 103. John Mechie, 35. Robert Woods, 69. You're looking at three guys that, let's face it, they have not been the go-to players at any point this season. Even when Nico Collins went down, we all expected, maybe the workload for those two young receivers to rise. Didn't necessarily happen. And you look at specifically John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson being featured a lot more on running plays where they're out there as an extension of the offensive line more than they are an extension of the wide receiver group. So the question is, how can the Texans survive moving forward? And for me, I think it's simple. Spread the offense out. And in that spread offense, I think that helps out your offensive line because you can get the ball out quicker. That also allows running lanes to open up. If you're successful, for Joe Mixon, he can pick his poison, but you got to be able to say, "Hey, listen, John Mechie, let me speak. Let me speak freely. I got to do this. I trust my eyes." And I'm going to put my glasses back on for the audio listeners. I trust my eyes. I know what I see. I know a talent when I see one, and I see it in John Mechie.
Yeah.
We thought we were going to see more of Nico Collins going down. Didn't happen. Now that we won't see Stefon Diggs for the rest of the year, there's no way around it. This offensive coaching staff, starting with Bobby, of course, they have to find ways to say, we got to get him the ball. Out of 5 catches, he's caught 4. Out of 10 catches, Xavier Hutchinson has caught in 5, and 2 of those were very difficult passes to catch.
Yeah.
So those young guys really got to get an opportunity to prove themselves. And I think this is a blessing in disguise for the Houston Texans. Short week. You can't go out and find somebody right now. You got to go with the guys that have been in this locker room, been on this roster since day one, and you can't play with scared money. You got to open up their playbook. And again, I really think spreading that ball out, spreading the offense out would allow those guys, especially John Mechie, to be able to operate in space. And now you're looking at them being able to take things underneath and pick up 8 yards, 12 yards, 15 yards. And oh, by the way, the tight end group, we need to see more of Dalton Schultz, who, by the way, is making $11 million this year after signing an extension in the summer.
What you're going to see, John, is you're going to see 2 players in Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie that are in the second year of this Bobby Slowick-led offense, who is in the second year of playing with CJ Stroud. Remember, on last year, Hutch was a rookie, and Metch was coming back from his therapy. I mean, excuse me, from his chemotherapy. And so, both of those players, it was almost like their rookie year, but they had to learn to play in that system and play with CJ Stroud. Now, both of them have another year under their belt. They have another year of playing, being in that wide receiver room, listening to a Nico Collins, listening to a Robert Woods, who helps out a lot, listening to a Stefon Diggs, learning from those guys through OTAs and learning from those guys through training camp and the preseason and through the first 8 games of the season. A lot of people forget, John, that we're talking about 2 wide receivers that had illustrious careers in college. And when I talked to them on Tuesday, I asked them about that. I was like, look, Hutch was an All-American. Mechie was an All-American. If Mechie doesn't get hurt, we see Mechie go higher in the draft than what he went. If he doesn't get hurt in that championship game, you see him go higher than what he did. John Mechie, just like Tank Dell, can run every route in the route tree. There's not a route that John Mechie can't run. And I've watched him run these routes. I know he can catch. I know that when CJ gets to scrambling around, I know that he can find an open space and become become one of those wide receivers that CJ can trust, like he trusts a Nico Collins. We've seen what Xavier Hutchinson does when he becomes a big body wide receiver for CJ down the field. So listen, no one wants to see, and like I said, I spoke with them on both of them on Tuesday, and I said this to them: no one wants to see a player of Stefon Diggs' caliber go down in order for these young men to get playing time. But we have got to use that old NFL old football, cliche. Next man up. It's next man up. You can't sit there and cry over the fact that you no longer have Stefon Diggs. And Stefon Diggs would want you to sit there and cry over him as well. And so I think that also, like you said, I think this is going to help Bobby out, and I think that it's going to help CJ out, because Absolutely. CJ was never forced to pass the ball to Stefon Diggs. But when you have a talented wide receiver on the field like that, you want to be able to get him touches as well. Now, now you're going to see the Tank Dell, 7 games last year. You've seen what he was able to do. You're going to get Nico back. And I think, John, before the whole Stefon Diggs trade happened, I think what we're about to see is what we thought that we were going to see coming out of last season, coming into this season, saying, hey, they got Tank on the outside. They got Nico on the outside. Now you're going to use Metch and you're going to use Hutch, and you also have possession wide receiver in Robert Woods.
And you also have, again, I think, a sneaky good tight end group with the lack of experience coming from Cade Stover. But the last game, they combined for over 50 yards on 6 targets.
Yeah.
That's good. Now, with no Stefon Diggs, you look at additional 20 yards, you look at additional 2 catches. But to your point, man, and I tweeted this, I really think that for CJ Stroud, it may be a game. It may be Thursday. Turning it around and having to figure this out in 4 days, 3.5 days, that's tough.
Yeah.
It may be a game. It may be a half. It may be a quarter. But I think because with no Stefon, you get Nico back soon. And like you mentioned, you start to figure it out like you did last year. You insert some of these other players. And, oh, yeah, by the way, you still got Joe Mixon. I think once CJ figured out how to make this work, we're going to see that moment from CJ Stroud like we saw against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year, like a moment like we saw against the Cincinnati Bengals. We're going to see that moment where he's out there picking teams apart. And again, I think this goes back to the conversation we had, his growth of taking what the defense gave him.
Yeah.
John Mechie not getting plays isn't because not getting opportunities isn't because he can't get open. He was getting open. Xavier Hutchinson was getting open. The problem was, number one, when you look at the route per run, yards per route run, Xavier Hutchinson, 0.62. John Mechie, right under Stefon Diggs, 1.03.
Yeah.
So those guys wasn't really getting a lot of opportunities downfield. We look at Nico Collins, 3.5, but he's Nico Collins. But when you have that limitation on the routes that you're running in the first place, yeah, Xavier Hutchinson, run a screen real quick. I know you're 6'2", but run a screen real quick.
Yeah.
In a bunch formation on the outside of Tank Dell. I mean, on the outside of John Mechie. Run that for us real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, just run a really quick out route. So the limitations have been there for those receivers. The limitations have been there not only for those two guys, but also for Tank Dell, but also for Stefon Diggs. And so I think removing these shackles of getting guys the ball away from the play calling, now it's an even playing field. It can be, at least. I'm looking at the positive side of it. And now you're giving CJ an opportunity to just work in space if you spread it out. Quicker passes. And I don't think this works without spreading the ball out.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily mean you get a pass, you get a pass, you get a pass. I mean the amount of bunch plays that we've seen so far, especially against the Indianapolis Colts, I don't think that gets it done.
Yeah.
I think that helps you out in terms of getting your tight ends involved, which is a good thing because now you look at those bunch formations, teams got to respect Joe Mixon. He's ran it over 100 yards every game he's finished. You got to respect that. And that allows for some play action boots to where you can hit Cade Stover underneath. You may be able to hit Dalton Schultz on the second level coming across. You may be able to do that. But for this team and offense to work, those receivers got to be an impactful part of this team moving forward. And without Diggs, I think we have to see those guys get the opportunities. The limitations on the play caller can't be there. Forcing what didn't work on two players to try to make it continue to work, right? How many of those second halves we've seen where the Houston Texans could have scored the ball?
Yeah.
You know, that didn't work. So you can't force
TJ about that on Tuesday.
You cannot force what already wasn't working on guys that were badly involved. You got to do things that make them comfortable. And I really think for John Mechie, it's spreading their ball.
Now watch what's going to happen, John, when Nico comes back. What Nico is going to do is Nico is going to also open up the field for a John Mechie to be able to work underneath.
Why, Sarge? Why, Sarge? Why, Sarge?
Why?
Why, Sarge?
Why?
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 Guess what's going to be open underneath?
Who?
Them youngins.
That's right.
Tank Dell. John Mechie.
Yeah. For sure.
Nico takes
and
the
you
top
know what?
off.
You know what, too, John? A lot of people underestimate the fact that Tank Dell can get down the field as well. They don't think that Tank has the speed to take the top off the defense. Now, he can't do it on consecutive plays. Of course, we know that. But Tank has speed as well. And not only that, Tank has speed and Tank has body control. The two things that help him out a whole lot, especially with a smaller frame that he has. And a lot of people underestimate him when he's doing that. When he gets down the field, he's like, oh, yeah, whatever. He knows how to contort his body to be able to adjust to anywhere the pass is going to be. And so when you have Nico coming back and running the routes that he's running and Tank running the routes that he's running, it should leave open the middle. It should put a lot of pressure. It should put a lot of pressure on linebackers because they're going to have to wonder what's coming underneath. And if you are dropping into zones and dropping into that zone, let's go right behind those linebackers. Well, guess what? If you're going to push them, if you're going to make them drop further into a zone, then we're going to eat you up with these tight ends. And there shouldn't be tight ends that's able to hold a Cade Stover and a Dalton Schultz on a consistent basis.
Right, especially the vet, Dalton Schultz, who, you know, we get on him a lot in terms of his blocking effort. And I will say, let's be fair, it's gotten a whole lot better. But if I'm Dalton Schultz, hey, man, y'all didn't pay me all this money to block as much as I have been blocking.
For sure.
So I need to get some of these passes downfield, and he's been better the last couple of games. Now, the question will be, should the Houston Texans look to bring in a wide receiver at the trade deadline, which takes place next week? So we'll talk about that on some more Locked On Texans podcast. All right, Texan fans, it's time to get on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, as we gear up for the Texans matchup against the New York Jets this Thursday. Let's talk about some juicy props you don't want to miss out on. How about this? The Texans' first drive resulting in a touchdown. That's sitting right now at plus 350. 40. If you're feeling good about CJ Stroud and the offense getting off to a fast start, that could be easy money. Or let's just say you're a fan of some cross-team action. If Joe Mixon scores the first touchdown of the game, you're looking at plus 430 odds. That's big time value for a single play, folks. So listen, the best part about it is right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you play $5. Win or lose, you're cashing in $200 in bonus bets. So what you waiting on? You shouldn't be waiting. Sorry, should they be waiting?
I shouldn't be waiting at all.
They shouldn't be waiting. Y'all should be running to FanDuel.com/locked on and get your bets in before Thursday kickoff. Bet on the Texans, bet on the props, and make every snap matter. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Sarge, this has been a hot topic in them Texans Twitter streets.
Yep.
You've seen it. I've seen it. We've all talked about it. And my thoughts about whether or not the Houston Texans should trade for a wide receiver at the deadline, no. I don't think there's a wide receiver out there that a lot of people wanted Deontay, and I did not want that. I saw his effort when he played in Pittsburgh, and that's not something that fits this culture here in Houston. So I'm glad that didn't work out for the Houston Texans. And according to Jonathan Alexander, our friend, the Texans never made a call. So good for the Texans. But I don't think that there's a wide receiver that will be worth trading for, that teams will be trading or dangling to trade, that will impact this team right now. I really don't. I think the Houston Texans have enough here on their roster. You got guys that have been here since day one of Bobby Slowick's tenure. John mentioned Xavier Hutchinson, Tank Dell, Nico Collins when he comes back, Robert Woods. So they've all been here since day one. They've seen this offense compete successfully. They've seen the 41 points. They've seen what they were able to do in the playoffs last year against the Cleveland Browns. So they know what makes this offense go. I think it's more so about adjusting to the players that you have to put out there on the field now compared to let's go find somebody outside this building. Yeah. And if there was a player that the Houston Texans should maybe bring in, it would be, I guess, Johnny Johnson III, already on the Houston Texans practice squad. Or if you feel comfortable about Ben Skoranek coming back to Houston, who competed well for the Texans this training camp, the Texans traded a 6th-round pick for him. Maybe you look at that, but I think the answers right now are on this roster. But what I will say before I hand it off to you, it is a blessing in disguise that this game is Thursday, because it does give them a look to see, okay, maybe we do need to go and look outside of the building, and the trade deadline is next week. So that gives them some time to scout, look around, and figure out what their next best move is. But
I'm disappointed in you, John.
I've disappointed you a couple times today.
Yeah, John, but I'm really disappointed in you right now. How could you overlook friend of the show, Jared Wayne?
I'm not looking over. No, I'm not. No, I am not looking over Jared Wayne. I like Jared Wayne a lot. I think Xavier Hutchinson and Jared Wayne bring the same thing to this team. And if you remember, both Johnny Johnson III and Ben Skoranek got an opportunity to actually play in the preseason, whereas Jared Wayne didn't get that opportunity. But he is on the practice squad.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just saying, like, they have somebody on the practice squad that they could bring up. And I put it like this, and this may sound crazy to some people, especially the ones who have not gotten a chance or opportunity to see CJ Stroud play on a consistent basis. But CJ really does have that next man up mentality. If you're open, I can get you the ball. And I do believe that Jared Wayne can get open. Now, I know there's going to be some wide receivers, some veteran wide receivers, but you're going to bring them in, and how quickly can they get acclimated to the playbook? How quickly can they get acclimated to playing in that Houston Texans offense compared to somebody that they already have? And like you said, Johnny Johnson has been here. He knows the plays as well. So when you look at what they already have in those 5 wide receivers that they have, and then they have those wide receivers on the practice squad, I believe that the Houston Texans have exactly what they need. Now, knowing Nick Caserio, like I know Nick Caserio, it's never enough, and he always plans ahead. So I would not be surprised if the Houston Texans did bring in one more wide receiver for an insurance policy, a veteran wide receiver who's out there, if for none other than blocking purposes, which side note, I feel like that's where the Houston Texans are going to miss Stefon Diggs as well, because he wasn't the best downfield blocker, but he didn't mind blocking either. Because I don't know if you remember this or not, but I think it was 2 weeks ago, he said, I've done more blocking here than I ever done in my career. But if that's what the team needs me to do, then that's what the team that's what I'm going to do. And he hasn't done a bad job of that. And so I can see Nick going out and saying, okay, just for insurance purposes only, let's go out and see if there's another wide receiver that we could bring in that doesn't have to have a lot of the touches, but does not have to have a lot of the touches, but can come in and block. And one more, John, I'm going to say this. What about there's a favorite player that you and former host of Locked On Texans podcast loved, and that was QT. Ain't that his name?
Tegan Quatoriano.
Did I call him QT?
You did, like the gas station.
I always do. TQ. Right? I know. I did that for Cody, who's going to be listening to this and to bother him. Hey, what if you ran? So what if you do, keep him on the active roster, and then you use Dalton Schultz, and then you use him, and Cade Stover has known to be a hybrid. You can line him up with his hand in the dirt, or you can stand him up.
Yeah.
And, he is one of those ones that, if used right, could be a Travis Kelce type wide receiver, could be a George Kittle, could be a Mark Andrews. Like, if you use him the right way. He's going through some growing pains right now as a rookie, but I mean, you got 3 tight ends, and especially since Brevin is out for the
man,
you bring in
Texans missed
TQ.
him.
You bring in TQ, and maybe so, John.
Yeah, I think I think so. The Jets, man, how can I put this really quick? The Jets are struggling, I think, on both sides of the ball, right? They're having
got a good defense, John. Second in passing. They're only giving up 161 yards per game.
They do have a good passing defense. I think there's some ways that can be exploited. I think hopefully we see Bobby break away from the mundaneness of his play calling.
Yes.
And understand I gotta find a way to get creatively to get those guys involved creatively. And I do think when you lose a player like Stefon and the security blanket of Nico Collins, who, by the way, is still, I think, top 7 in the league in receiving yards.
Yes.
When you lose that security blanket, now your back is against the wall a little bit as a play caller. Yeah, your running back is going to do what he got to do. But the issue has been you guys may get to the positive side of the field, or you guys may just get pushed back to where you're in long situations. The passing offense has not been consistent enough for you to continue to score those 7 points. So I think he has to find a way to say, you know what, I'm laying it all out. I can afford to do that against a bad team. I can afford to do that on a team that has their own identity crisis, and I can afford to do that right now because, God dog it, I got to find a way to get it done.
Yeah.
So to your point, find a way to use them. Yep. Find a way to use TQ. Find a way to use Cade Stover. Find a way to use and get Dalton Schultz involved. Find a way to get these players involved, because if we come out of that game Thursday and we say to ourselves, man, the Texans really need X, Y, and Z, and if I call and text you and I say, you know what, I still don't think they need him. I saw Xavier Hutchinson run a screen route on 3rd and 8. I saw those guys do this, and I still think it's play calling. It won't be because of the talent that they have on the roster. It's going to be because of the lack thereof talent as a play caller. Thank you guys for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. And Sarge continues to go back into mourning. Pray for him, brother. Let's pray for our brothers and sisters that need it right now as we continue to pray. Make sure that you
all right, James,
give to the building fund. And also follow the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
And follow me on the app formerly known as Twitter.
That was so sad.
Big Sarge Sports with the Z at the end. Get well soon, Stefon.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.